So I came across a video by PFF, and they discussed the Packers, and the title is Predicting the Green Bay Packers 2024 Win Total. And this is with Steve and Sam on their podcast, and I've listened to their podcast for a while, or lots of their episodes over the past few years, so I enjoy hearing what they say. And so I'm curious to see what they think about the Packers. This was posted sometime in the past few weeks. So let's hear what they have to say here.
9.5 for the Packers, so a game behind the Lions. I mean, I want to say over for them too. What are your thoughts on the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting teams in the league because of this youth movement. They feel like the trap everybody falls into when they play football manager for any extended period of time, which is just having like an entire squad full of 21-year-olds and continually replacing anybody that reaches like the age of 26 with another exciting young wunderkid prospect, and never actually sort of creating the team that is old enough to be amazing, right? Like you're just constantly planning for the future. Except, so for the second year in a row, they're going to have the youngest roster in the NFL. But the difference is they looked like last season that they were prepared to win with that kind of roster. Like they went on this run late last season. Jordan Love looked fantastic. They went into the playoffs and, could have potentially upset one of the best teams in the league, and except they didn't play at that level. Like, whether it was the rain or whether it was simply a bad game, they didn't play at the level they'd been playing at for the sort of previous run, and ultimately fell short. But so they then come into this year, again, with the youngest roster in the league, having tinkered around with it a bit. But I think it presents this wide range of outcomes where if any significant number of that youth movement takes a significant step forward in development over the course of an off season, or just, by getting a year older and a year more experience and blah, 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 they could be really, really good. Or because you're relying on so many young players, like there's just always the capacity for that to go south in a hurry. And suddenly they're just not anywhere near as good as they look like they were going to be at the second half of last season. So,
all right. So my thoughts about this Packers, Sam noting the Packers youth that they have on this roster. I think we saw some of that youth impact the start of the Packers season when they went on that losing streak. And I think we saw the result of them getting more experience, becoming more comfortable, because so many of these young players didn't really have veterans ahead of them. Like the Packers, decided to release, a few different tight ends, before last season. And so Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, they weren't having to wait and allow some other veteran tight end to play ahead of them. They were getting a ton of snaps early. And so I think they learned and they grew as they were starting. And Brian Gutekunst, that was one point he had made before last season, is that he wanted, this Packers team last year for these young players to get a ton of experience playing a ton of snaps. And I think that it allowed the Packers to develop as the season went on. And so my thought is just that if that's how good the Packers got last year, and that was still in year one when all these Packers players were still in their first season, I just don't see how they take a big step back at all with them going into year two. I think that, they have a full season under their belt. I just don't see them going back to, the way they played in that losing streak where you have so many young players. There's some mental mistakes. Jordan Love wasn't playing great. Sure, Jordan Love could have some bad games, but I just don't see lots of these young players like reverting to making a ton of mental mistakes consistently. I think that with the youth here, considering how young it was last year, it is still a very young team, but you have so many players who were basically starters last year. Jaden Reed as a rookie, Luke Musgrave when he wasn't injured, lots of these other guys who now have that experience and are no longer those rookie type players. And there are a couple rookies the Packers will be relying on this year, Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard, and so there are some question marks with, how quickly will they develop and how good will they be for this Packers defense. But I still don't see it as a problem, and I don't really see the Packers getting below 9 wins like they had last season, considering half the year they were trying to figure things out. They figured it out, and I think that we're going to see them continue to improve as the years go by.
I feel like Green Bay is one of those teams that has a really broad range of outcomes. I know everyone's going to skew optimistically because of the young players. It's automatically what you do. Youth equals hope equals potential. But I do think there's a big negative potential as well that we're just sort of not really going to acknowledge.
You're way too realistic here, Sam. I'm buying into the youth movement. I buy it. I mean, the one thing I'll say is, to me, it depends on the second half of the year. Jordan Love, right? I mean, he's not the only quarterback to ever have a great second half in his youth, where it's like, okay, that's what he is from now on.
Right.
I mean, last year at this time, we were saying the same thing about Trevor Lawrence. It was Trevor Lawrence's second year, and if you, depending on where you put the cutoff, it was like, oh, since week 8 or since week 9, Trevor Lawrence is QB2 in PFF grading, and Jordan Love is similar.
Had a year like that. Baker Mayfield had a year where similar. I forget where the cutoff was, but he was in the top 3 of quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of grade, in terms of a bunch of other stuff, from a significant portion of the year. Like, it was at least half the season. If you just cut off Baker Mayfield for like half a year plus, was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and it didn't happen, didn't sustain.
Right. So again, Packers fans, just hear me out. I'm not trying to temper expectations for Jordan Love. I have great expectations for Jordan Love. The difference between the first half of the season, where the accuracy was a little scattershot, and we've heard the feedback. The receivers were young and they weren't on the same page. It wasn't as bad. It wasn't great, though. It wasn't great. The offense, remember, I used the statement, it looked like the Packers were playing with different playbooks. Like, the QB room and the wide receiver room had different playbooks. They were not on the same page. And then all of a sudden, week 8, 9, whatever that cutoff is, whatever you want to use, but it's specifically after Thanksgiving and beyond, Jordan Love had all sorts of Aaron Rodgers-esque type of throws. But for me, forget Rodgers and Favre and all those comps. The confidence that Love played with, the confidence to stand in there, to make plays, to trust his arm, and then put the ball into incredible spots for just his receivers to go up and get the ball, the big-time throws that Love had. I mean, it was awesome. And you pair that with the actual narrative that the Packers drafted him back in 2020, and they were supposed to systematically develop him. And so when a switch is flipped, it's like, oh, that's what we expected because he was a developmental prospect and he has developed. That's why the narrative is pretty clean on Love. But all that to be said, all I'm trying to say is we've seen 8-game stretches and 10-game stretches of really good play, and that's not necessarily the goal for a quarterback. Now you have to adjust to defenses adjusting to you. Now you have to remain consistent. And so those are my questions for Love.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, you don't really know if a player is going to be consistent until they prove to be consistent. You could have probably said the same thing about Aaron Rodgers after his first year starting, where he looked good, but you could have said, well, we don't know if he's going to continue. And so I totally understand their point. I, for one, believe that Jordan Love is going to continue to play at that level. That's my belief, but I guess you don't know until you see it on the field and you see what the Packers really are. But I think that with this young team, with now a full year under their belt, playoff experience, all this stuff, Josh Jacobs, I just think that this Packers team is going to be better in 2024. And if I had to put like a percentage chance on like the Packers being much better than last year or like worse, I put it like 80% chance the Packers are much better, 20% they're worse, or 90-10. Like, that's how confident I am, because I do think Jordan Love is a special type prospect. And so we'll see. We'll let the season play out and see if Love is fully the real deal. I believe he is. Some people may be holding back to wait until he does it again, but I think he's going to do it again. So those are my thoughts. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.